Hello everyone. Today, me, Aytaj and Aisha will introduce you our video project about food security. Food insecurity is one of the most serious problems facing the world. It's said that there is enough food for everyone in the world, but because of the great changes that have quickly taken place, the food ration has become less than before, and it's difficult to provide it. Food security is essential to ensure that everyone has enough to eat and that families can build their communities without worrying about the safety of their lives. In order to meet global needs, food production must be doubled in the few next years to solve many problems such as hunger, malnutrition, and related health problems. Population growth is driving consumption growth, which means that global demand will increase in the upcoming years, as well as growing competition for land, water, and energy.
Population growth is driving consumption growth, which means that global demand will increase in the coming year, as well as growing competition for land, water, and energy. Population growth will affect the ability of some countries to produce food, especially in poor developing countries. Thus, improved nutrition plays a central role in increasing incomes, reducing poverty, and ensuring good food quality. Insufficient food quality affects mothers in nutrition because they are more likely to give birth. So, mothers who are malnourished later give birth to children with bad health. We have to be aware of this global issue and try to prevent it. And we did research on this topic according to the given plan, and at the end we concluded and talked about ways of preventing food security problems. Why food security is such a major global challenge? The obvious reason is that everybody needs food, but the complexity of delivering sufficient food to a national population and the whole world's population shows why food security is such a priority for all countries, whether developing or developed. In short, this is a global challenge because it's not just about food and feeding people, but also about practically all aspects of an economy and society.
Adults living in food insecure households are more vulnerable to infectious disease, poor oral health, injury, and chronic conditions such as depression, anxiety disorders, heart disease, hypertension, arthritis, back problems, and chronic pain. They are also more likely to be diagnosed with multiple chronic diseases. The negative health impacts are more significant for those living in severely food insecure households. Food insecurity is a major problem in many countries, as we have seen in some lower income countries such as Asia and parts of Africa. Food insecurity has a serious impact on people personally and on a country's ability to lift itself out of poverty. Some of the consequences of food insecurity include hunger, malnutrition, soil erosion, rising prices, and social unrest.
Now, talking about the major causes of the food insecurity. The first cause, lack of access to farming lands. Food is grown or produced on the ground. This also generates income. However, many people do not have their own land or cannot afford to have access to agricultural land. Land ownership improves agricultural productivity because it can be used to produce a variety of food crops, even on a small scale. However, without access to agricultural land, this means missing a key resource for food crop production. The second cause, land grabbing. It's closely related to the point above. Land grabbing is when land traditionally owned or cultivated by families, groups, or communities is taken from them by large investors or powerful government officials. They acquire land to expand their empires, extract natural resources, or even grow food for export. Land grabbing deprives local communities of the resources they desperately need to grow food crops and vegetables for survival. The end result is poverty and social instability, further exacerbating food insecurity.
Now we'll talk about the conflict, violence, and wars. Conflicts, wars, and violence affect food production supply. In most countries where civil war has been prevalent for many years, food insecurity is very high, and examples can be Somalia and South Sudan in Africa. A recent example is Syria's agricultural production, which has been negatively impacted by the conflict. In October 2018, 5 million Syrians faced food insecurity, and part of it due to the conflict. Conflict-related food shortages can also trigger years of food crisis, even if the fighting has ended. Now we'll talk about the fast-paced population growth. We live in a world where, despite the death rate, the birth rate is higher. And the growing population means there are additional mouths to feed on daily basis. Population growth with limited growth in available food means increased food insecurity. And now about the natural disasters. For example, floods, typhoons, cyclones, and maybe other natural disasters can wipe out an entire harvest or also destroy crops. This is devastating, and of course, most especially for rural communities and families who generally rely on such harvest and staple small scale farming on their daily food.
Wastage of food. Billions of dollars worth of edible products are thrown away every year, mostly in developed countries. For example, during coronavirus pandemic, farmers are throwing away billions of dollars worth of food as restaurants and supermarkets that used to buy such food are closing. Production level exceed consumption, which means food is wasted and people in developed countries are starving to death. China and India produce more household food waste than any other country worldwide, as estimated 92 million and 69 million metric tons every year respectively. This is unsurprising, considering that both countries have by far the largest population globally.
The appropriate measurement of food security is critical for targeting food and economic aid, supporting early famine warning and global monitoring systems, evaluating nutrition, health, and development programs, and informing government policy across many sectors. Food security in a population means that all people at all times have sufficient access to the food to meet their dietary needs for a productive and healthy life. The three components of food security: the first one is availability, which means having sufficient quantities of appropriate food available. The second one is access, having adequate income or other resources to access food. And the third one, utilization or consumption, which means having adequate dietary intake and the ability to absorb and use nutrients in the body.
Now let's talk about the food production, major food producers, and the factors affecting food production and distribution, and also the impact of food to the health and the sustainability of food supply. What actually is food production? Food production, as the name implies, is the process of converting raw resources into ready-made food items for human consumption, either at home or in food processing industries. Its procedure includes scientific methodologies. The food system is a complete set of individuals, institutions, activities, processes, and infrastructure involved in producing and consuming food for a certain population. Agriculture is the process of producing food, feeding products, fiber, and other desired products by the growing of certain plants and the raising of domesticated animals. What is an example of food production? Primary food production includes the growth and harvesting of crops and the rearing and slaughtering of livestock animals. Other examples can be milking, catching fish and seafood, and also collecting of hen eggs.
The world's top food producing countries, China, India, the US, and Brazil, share the advantages of large populations, big land areas, and climate zones suitable for growing the variety of crops. There are also major differences in the role that food production plays in their economies. Despite having just 10% of world's arable land, China generates a quarter of world's grain output and leads the world with its grain, cotton, fruit, vegetables, meat, poultry, eggs, and fishery goods. While much of China's land is too mountainous and not suitable for farming, the rich soils in these countries, east and south, are very productive. India is the world's largest producer of milk, jute, and pulses. India is also the world's second largest producer of rice, wheat, sugarcane, fruit, vegetables, cotton, and groundnuts. Despite being self-sufficient in grain production, India is highly dependent on subsistence agriculture as the poorest per capita country on this list.
Now talking about the US. Even though just 1% of all employed people in the US work in agriculture, the country is among top producers. The top 5 commodities produced worldwide in terms of tons are wheat, rice, potatoes, maize, and sugarcane according to the demand-supply relationship. Cereal crop yields and productivity have continued to rise in recent decades despite the significant decline in planted land. Now, talking about Brazil, agriculture, especially sugarcane, has historically been the basis of the Brazilian economy. Over the past 3 decades, the percentage of the workforce that is working in agriculture has continuously decreased, but since the beginning of the 21st century, Brazil undergone a remarkable transformation from a being major exporter of tropical agricultural products like coffee, sugar, and cacao to a major global supplier of soybeans, soybean products, corn, cotton, sugar, coffee, orange juice, and meat. Global food supply is not even. Some places produce more food than others. There are many reasons why some countries produce more food than others. Now we will talk about reasons.
And of course about the climate, as we know, every 10 years the temperatures are rising by about 0.2 degrees because of the global warming. And in some regions the amount of rain can rise, but in other it falls. In particular, for farmers who are already trying to survive, warmer temperatures and unpredictable rainfall are making farming challenging. And even developed countries can experience droughts. For instance, when Australia and Russia have droughts, there is less food available globally and food prices is rising, making the world's poorest people the most vulnerable. Now let's talk about technology. The amount of food available has increased due to technological advancements. And with the use of greenhouses, irrigation, and also fertilizers, technology can fix problems with temperature, water availability, and nutritional deficiency. All year long, high-income countries import food from all around the world. And however, the market for biofuels is expanding, replacing important farmland. Pests and diseases. Pesticides have increased crop yields. Farmers in wealthier countries can afford pesticides, while most farmers in poorer countries cannot afford them.
Water stress. Water is supplied via irrigation systems to Water stress. Water is supplied via irrigation systems to countries with unreliable or little rainfall. Crop yields can be doubled by irrigation, but constructing these systems can be expensive. Water can be directly taken from rivers or underground aquifers, but both of them have an impact on the environment. Conflict. War forces farmers to flee their land or fight within conflict. Food can be used as a weapon, with the enemies cutting off food supplies in order to gain ground. Crops can also be destroyed during fighting. Food shortages have caused riots and conflicts as well. Food distribution provide a bridge between the people who produce food and people who sell it. They gather products from farmers and food processors, store them in the warehouses, and transport them to the retail and wholesale buyers. From country to country, the production and distribution of food influences by two variables: natural resource endowments and human institutions.
Now, talking about resources. The natural resource endowment of a country can include such things as forests, water, fertile land, or deposits, and a diversity of wildlife. The amount of natural resources of a country determines how much country can produce for its own people. Now, about human institutions. Human institutions such as government, public policy, aid organizations not only set up systems to produce and distribute food, but also to import and export food if there are shortages or excesses. Now let's talk about healthy and sustainable diets as well as food access. Consuming high quality food is critical since it helps to lower the risk of physical health concerns such as heart diseases and diabetes. It also improves your sleeping patterns, energy levels, and overall well-being. You may have observed that types of food you choose, as well as how much you consume, are frequently influenced by your mood. We need to consume high quality food on a regular basis in order to keep our bodies functioning properly, while not harming the environment, which is why the term sustainable food production is used.
Sustainable food production is defined as a mode of production that uses non-polluting techniques and systems that save non-renewable energy and natural resources. and also are economically efficient, are safe for workers, communities, and consumers, and do not endanger future generations' requirements. A lack of time and natural resources for meal preparation also contribute to food insecurity, along with racial segregation and poverty.
For all of these reasons, many low income and food insecure households rely on fast food restaurants, which is using inorganic material in order to make food for everyone. That leads to negative consequences on people's health. Junk food can make you feel tired, bloated, and unable to concentrate. Long term, junk foods can lead to tooth decay, poor bowel habits. Junk foods can also lead to obesity and associated diseases such as heart disease. Due to research, most sold food types in global market are fruits, vegetables, meat and poultry, fish and seafood, and eggs.
Now, seafood and aquaculture. One of the key factors of food security is fish. It's a primary source of protein and essential nutrients. Fisheries, aquaculture, and related activities provide income and livelihoods for numerous communities across the world, including small-scale fisheries. The growing demand for fish questions the sustainability of marine fisheries and aquaculture, now fundamental supplier of fish. The report considers the environmental, social, and economic challenges faced by all actors towards the sustainable supply of fish, sustainable livelihoods of fish-dependent communities, and equitable access to fish for the good nutrition of all population worldwide. It presents policy-oriented analysis and recommendations addressed to governments, private sector, and civil society in order to fully realize the potential for sustainable fisheries and aquaculture to contribute to food security and nutrition.
And now let's talk about the food companies. The food industry is faced with several challenges at the same time. To supply safe and affordable foodstuff in sufficient quantity, to provide products in condition where demand surprises for human population growth, to operate in circumstances of ever-increasing competition, to protect the environment and respond to the population's public health concerns. An organization's success depends on the knowledge, skills, creativity, and the motivation of the company's workers and partners. Focus on its employees enables as a company's development and improvement, whereas business ethics ensures public health and safety protection, environmental protection, and life quality improvement. The company management's responsibility lies foremost in education, worker training and development, thus enabling a direct and indirect influence on the foodstuff quality and satisfying consumer requests in terms of foodstuff quality characteristics.
Now I'm gonna talk about food riots in history. What do you mean by food riots? Food riots can occur when food is scarce or unequally distributed. Causes can be rising food prices, crop failure, improper food storage, transportation problems, food speculation, hoarding, food poisoning, or pest attacks. From the 14th to the middle of the 19th century, food riots were increasingly observed in Europe. These riots pitted vulnerable consumers against manufacturers and traders, and both sides turned to their rulers for protection and support. As a part of broad and long tradition of collective bargaining by riots, food riots flare up when, in the face of shortages and rising prices, a mob of mostly consumers gather to demand affordable livelihoods, usually grain or bread. They confronted those who controlled this item of first necessity, bakers, merchants, millers, cultivators, and local authorities, and took and shared what provisions they needed, sometimes forcing sales at prices below market or asking prices. Much of the evidence used to support this view was based on the series of apparently great disasters that struck in Europe in the 14th century: the Mongol invasions, the Great Famine, the Black Death, and subsequent years. The financial collapse of the great Italian banking houses in nearly 14th century and the vastly increased cost and devastating effects on larger scale and welfare.
Now, about Russia-Ukraine war and impact on world food supply. In addition to huge loss of life and destruction, Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe, has caused energy and food problems, exacerbating the vulnerability of existing food systems already weakened by climate change and COVID pandemic. Fears of an unprecedented global food crisis similar to or worse than that was in 2007 and 2008 are on the rise, adding to ripple effects on security, migration, and political instability.
The supply shock triggered by the blockade of Ukrainian exports, combined with record price levels for energy and essential goods, forced several countries to impose export restrictions, fueling market turmoil and speculative activity that led to the unpredictability of global food supplies. As the war continues and stakes rise, Russia is increasingly using fears and food shortages as a new weapon in its hybrid way. And since February 2022, food security has been at the center of the international political agenda.
The reaction of international community, including an agreement brokered by the UN and Turkey to unblock exports from Black Sea ports, has assuaged fears of a looming large-scale global food crisis. However, a number of countries dependent on food imports and food aid remain highly vulnerable to food price and exchange rate volatility.
Ideas to prevent food insecurity. Food insecurity affects over 820 million people all over the world, and no region is exempt from it. Being global challenge, governments and international institutions have to employ all possible means to defeat food insecurity. The United Nations, for instance, posed 17 Sustainable Development Goals which ought to be achieved by 2030. Achieving food security and improved nutrition, ending hunger and promoting sustainable agriculture is a second goal. It's therefore up to every individual, family, group, organization, corporation, institution and government to achieve food security before 2030. Not much has been done by institutions and countries, but there are hopes for food secure future. Here, we thought about some possible solutions to prevent food insecurity.
Firstly, reduce food waste. Food is wasted mainly because of inefficient preparations, bumpy or bad roads, over-selective customers, and inadequate storage facilities. If storage facilities are improved and there are adequate preparations for how the food will be used, less food will be wasted, and there will be more food secure community. And as mentioned before, FAO reports that each year about 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted globally. Secondly, reduce the risk of commercializing. If food is grown for the purpose of feeding the community or nation, then food insecurity levels will go down. Farmers can produce more food crops and will be able to produce cash crops when there are enough food crops in the market. There will be less risk of commercialization of food if it is sufficient in the market. Governments should also implement programs that can allow farmers to know when there is sufficient food for everyone.
Work towards defeating climate change. Climate change is severely affecting our lives and the production of food. If we fight the climate change and farm sustainably, we will be able to ensure that there is enough food for us and future generations. This is an additional step for fighting food insecurity.
Last but not least, improve trade policies. Some farmers fail to feed community because of unfair trade policies. Corporate giants have already stepped in and commercialized food, making it harder for small-scale farmers to have their products in the market. Governments should therefore improve such policies and make it fair for everyone to participate.
Now I'm gonna talk about conclusion. In conclusion, we learned what food security is and what food insecurity is. We discussed what are the causes of food insecurity and ways to solve it. We discussed what are the major food producers and how they cause food insecurity. We also did interview based on this topic. We got average results on our interview. Our interviewers know knew what is food security and what makes food secure. These people were generally people that were included and had relations with industry. To increase people's awareness, we could make some more of these projects or create channels which can explain everything detailed about food and food industry.
Food security is a global challenge, wastage of food and corporations, impact of inorganic food and junk food on health. Also, aquaculture, Russian-Ukrainian war, COVID, climate change, and food rates history were mentioned as well. We also conducted an interview on the topic. Our interview results were average. Our interviewers understood what food security is and what factors contribute to food security. These were typically persons who were included and had connections with industry. Food security is a notion that most people in our country are familiar with.
They understand what makes food secure and what must consider while purchasing food. According to our interviews, people are paying attention to the expiration date of food and quality of packaging. However, some people are unfamiliar with the concept. When we were doing interviews, we noticed that not everyone was familiar with the topic that much. They don't know about the problem of food insecurity globally, what it might lead to. In the fifth question, which countries are suffering from food insecurity mostly, people mentioned mainly about Africa. To raise awareness, we might hold seminars and truly explain what food security involves.
Salam.
Birinci sual. Qida təhlükəsizliyi haqqında məlumatınız varmı?
Müəyyən qədər var. Nə mənada? Yəni qida təhlükəsizliyinə riayət etmək üçün yəni istehsalçı birinci istehsal elədiyi qida məhsullarının üstünə tarixlər qoyulmalıdır ki, yəni bunun yararlılıq müddəti və istifadəçi də həmişə baxmalıdır, ona nəzarət etməlidir ki, yəni həm də ki tərkibi mütləq göstərilməlidir, qidanın tərkibində nə var. Yəni bu qida, biz gördüyümüz, yəni biz bilmirik onun içində nə var. Onun tərkibi yazılır ki, filan maddələr var bunun tərkibində, filan yağ var, duz nə qədər deyil. Bunlar hamısı göstərilməlidir ki, kimə xeyirdir, kimə ziyandır, o alan bilsin. Məsələn, şəkər xəstələri şəkərsiz istəyir, kola içsin alanda. Yəni bunlar hamısı göstərilməlidir. Belə cürə, yəni bu çox geniş danışmaq olar. İndi belə də müəyyən qədər məlumat verir.
Sizcə qida təhlükəsizliyi vacibdirmi?
Əlbəttə, insanın sağlamlığı qida təhlükəsizliyi ilə birbaşa bağlıdır. Nə qədər qida təhlükəsizliyinə yüksək riayət olunursa, o qədər o sağlamlıq qorunur. Mən belə
Bəli. Doğrudur. Sizcə Azərbaycanda qida təhlükəsizliyi qaydalarına əməl olunurmu?
Kifayət qədər məncə olunur. İndi qüsurlar da olmamış olmazdı.
Qida məhsulları alarkən nələrə diqqət yetirirsiniz?
Onun tarixi, bir də mən ümumiyyətlə çalışıram həmişə təbii qidalar alım.
Bəli. Və axırıncı sual. Hansı ölkələrdə qida təhlükəsizliyindən ən çox əziyyət çəkirlər?
Mən deyədim, 3-cü dünya ölkələri deyirlər, nə Afrikadır, nə Asiyanın bəzi hissələrində. Mən onları bilirəm, məlumat, elə çox dəqiq məlumatım yoxdur, ancaq o ölkələrdə həqiqətən qida çatışmamazlığı, yəni qidanın keyfiyyəti, hələ nəinki keyfiyyəti, çatışmamazlıq problemi var. Yəni belə şeylər var, şükür Allah, bizdə elə problemlər yoxdur.
Bəli, çox sağ olun.
Buyurun, sağ olun.
Salam.
Salam.
Qida təhlükəsizliyi haqqında məlumatınız varmı?
Bəli, məlumat var. Bu qidanın təzə və sertifikatdan keçirilmiş olmasıdır.
Aha, ikinci sual. Sizcə qida təhlükəsizliyi vacibdirmi?
Bəli, çox vacibdir. Bu insanların sağlamlığına çox böyük təsir olduğu üçün vacibdir.
Okay, üçüncü sual. Sizcə Azərbaycanda qida təhlükəsizliyi qaydalarına əməl olunurmu?
Bir çox dükanlarda diqqət yetirilmirdi. Amma cənab prezidentimizin islahatlarından sonra bu məsələ öz əlini tapdı.
Okay. Dördüncü sual. Qida məhsulları alarkən nələrə diqqət yetirirsiniz?
Alarkən istehsal tarixinə və görünüşünə diqqət yetiririk.
Beşinci sual. Hansı ölkələr qida təhlükəsizliyindən ən çox əziyyət çəkir?
Məncə bu az inkişaf etmiş ölkələr arasındadır. Əsasən də Afrikada.
Oldu. Çox sağ olun.
Sağ olun.
Salamlar.
Birinci sualımız, qida təhlükəsizliyi haqqında məlumatınız varmı?
Var, buyurun.
Nə deyə bilərsin?
Qida təhlükəsizliyi haqqında məlumatım o deməkdir ki, biz satdığımız, qəbul etdiyimiz qidaları əvvəl surokunu yoxlayırıq. Satmaya yararlıdırsa, vitrində saxlayırıq. Əgər yararsızdırsa, biz onları yığışdırırıq. Hər gün onlara riayət olunur. Çünki onlardan bizim dövlətlərimiz qəbul edir, yeyir, qidalanır. Kənar şəxslərdə ona görə biz göz haqqını veririk müştəriyə ki, qidalarımız həmişə təzə, təravətli, yeni və müştərinin gözünə uyğun, ürəyinə uyğun, təmiz, təzə qidalar olsun.
İkinci sualımız, sizcə qida təhlükəsizliyi vacibdirmi?
Bəli. İndi bu vəziyyətdə çox önəmlidir. Vacib və önəmlidir.
Üçüncü sualımız, sizcə Azərbaycanda qida təhlükəsizliyi qaydalarına əməl olunurmu?
Tam deməzdim. Tam deməzdim. Olunur, amma tam deməzdim.
Dördüncü sual, qida məhsulları alarkən nələrə diqqət yetirirsiniz?
Surokuna, aldığım qidanın surokuna, müddətinə, vaxtına.
Və beşinci sualımız, hansı ölkələr qida təhlükəsizliyindən ən çox əziyyət çəkir?
Afrika məncə.